Welcome to Thinking Green. This is the last of a series of pre-taped shows. Tuesdays have been kind of a funny night, and this show is being aired on election night, but taped a few days ahead of time because we're all going to be at the polls on Tuesday when you're watching this. Tonight's show is on the subject of community land trusts, and my guests are Maureen Connaughton and Reona Dyess, who, along with me, actually, are part of a local group that is exploring the idea of starting a community land trust in New London. So welcome, Mo, and welcome, Reona. I guess I'm going to ask each of you how you kind of became interested in the subject of working for community land trusts and affordable housing in New London. And you can go in whichever order you want.
So my initial response was based on my personal experience. I'd been a renter for some years outside of New London, and we decided to buy, and I knew already, because I'd owned in Philadelphia before, what the benefits of home ownership were. And when we talked about putting it, the idea of a trust, I wondered, well, what does that mean for those benefits of home ownership, and how would that affect, the mortgage interest deduction? And since I work from home, would that affect how I could deduct that? And I really knew I needed more information because from we see in the film, it works very differently than that, and it's more of a benefit for everyone. But also, after renting for a while, I really knew that I needed the stability of knowing where I was going to live next year. We've been living in the same rental for a number of years, but the incentive to take care of it is not there when you have to call your landlord in order to have something repaired, and those repairs were frequently inadequate. And I found that I knew that I would really benefit from owning again, and that as I own and I feel more secure, that I start to feel more creative, which is where I want to be. Yeah.
And I guess I'll ask very briefly what the process of buying a house was. Was it complicated, or was it fairly straightforward?
This time, for Dan and I, because we both had unusual job histories, we went in to consult about a mortgage 3 years ago, and we talked at that time about where we needed to get to, because we wanted to talk about where we needed to get to with our savings, and also where we needed to get to with our reportable job income, our credit, et cetera. And so that gave us a pathway to home ownership. And in 2 years we were ready and went back and found out what we were qualified for, and then we started shopping.
You know, I'm excited to hear about that. I had the opportunity to watch my families grow. And what I mean by that, I had quite a few families that
And
had...
this is through your years at the Drop, right?
Yes, the Drop and Learning Center in New London, Connecticut.
So we're not talking about your aunts and uncles. And
No, I'm talking about the families that I have the opportunity to serve through child care over the years. So I had families that had benefited from different organizations, such as Dime Savings Bank had a program where the parents was able to, let's say, improve their credit rates, also to save up for the down payment. OIC had a program that also gave our parents the opportunity to learn about home ownership. But then Habitat for Humanity, I had about 4 families that had homes built for them or with them, because they have to also help build the home through Habitat for Humanity. So I had the opportunity to watch them enjoy the benefit of being homeowners, because when they became homeowners, they were more in tune to, wait a minute, I'm paying my tax dollars. I want to know, how's the school system serving me? Wait a minute, what is city council? Well, how's this budget going? How are they taking care of our community? So it was a little bit different, me watching them. Unfortunately, I'm not a homeowner, but I did go through the process this year. So it's, I to look at buying a home for myself, because, that was something that I wanted to do, because I've been working at the Drop and Learning Center for 21 years. I enjoy being in New London, and I love the families that I serve. So, it's an area that I want to invest in. So, and then I'm also a part of St. Francis House, which is also an organization that's have a interest in community land trust. But then another thing, Drop and Learning Center is looking to have a home, because it is important to know where you're going to be at the next year.
Yeah.
That is so important. So, I had, applied through Equity Trust, which is Francis Fund, for securing a loan so we can purchase a building, so we can have a steady home, because it really is important.
And as you're talking, I'm thinking it isn't just about you and I all knowing where we'll be in a year, but we'll know who our neighbors will be in a year, because, once people are buying home, the neighborhoods are a lot less transient. And although people, of course, do up and move and have freedom to do so, the neighborhood itself stays a lot more stable if you have at least a percentage of home ownership within it. So let's talk a little bit about how we got to this problem of not enough home ownership. We'll talk about statistics in New London in more detail in a later part of the show, but New London has only about 36 or 37% home ownership, which is very low if you compare it statewide or nationwide. And so I don't know if this was always the case, but maybe you can talk a little bit about the history and the threats that have affected the availability of housing that working people can afford.
So because I also had a personal experience with it, where I saw in Philadelphia how the mortgage market changed and how inflated the market became. And I think that's something that we're afraid of happening in New London, and that it can happen. We know that gentrification can happen really quickly if there's other positive things going on, like new jobs in the area, and we want that. But we also want to preserve a diversity of housing for different levels of income. And so in 2008, we all know about the mortgage crisis, and we know why that happened. We know that there was inflation in the values nationally. We know that mortgage banks were practicing some predatory lending, and that they were qualifying people for homes that they could not afford and could not realistically keep up with. The mortgages themselves, the products that were being sold were junk. When you are only paying interest only on a mortgage, you're never going to build any equity in that home. And when, for example, you have high interest rates, or that you can't, that the default rate becomes so high that it just wrecks people's lives after they've had a default on a mortgage. It's hard to come back from that. So after the crisis, I think a lot of people found that credit was less available, there were more restrictions, but what had happened to make that market safer for people. And we don't have that safety anymore that's going to guarantee that prices are not going to be inflated and that banks are not going to behave predatorily.
And unfortunately, the banks were bailed out, but the owners were not.
Yeah.
And I think if you know, for those of us who look at real estate transactions whenever they're printed, there are still, it seems, a disproportionate number of defaulted mortgages. And this is like almost 10 years after the real crisis. We're still seeing some people losing, choosing to walk away from their homes rather than be able to sell them and retain equity or.
And although the rate has come down a lot, in September, Connecticut was still in the top 10 of foreclosures in the nation.
Well, I know when we were looking to buy in 2004, we were approved for some insane amount of money, which, we ended up buying a home that was 2/3 of what we were approved of, for, and we felt pretty comfortable with that. We would not have felt very comfortable with, and we'd probably still be paying off a house if we had gone with what the banks allowed. But luckily we bought when the home prices were low enough that was an option. But when they were so inflated during the bubble, there weren't those lower priced options. I wanted to talk a little bit too about how, in the 50s and 60s, and I lived through this in Philadelphia when we had a lot of flight from the cities to the suburbs. Mm-hmm. What happened in the cities? Like, some of these houses were owned in the 30s and rentals in the 50s.
It's amazing that you said I'm from Detroit, and currently I have seen that happen. A lot of people moved out to the suburbs. I hate to say it, but I think I was just maybe 5 years old or not even born yet in the 60s, early 60s.
Oh.
So, but with that being said, a lot of people move out. And right now in Detroit, what is happening that when all the people moved out to the suburbs, those houses, some people, at one time it was beautiful neighborhoods, but a lot of industry had went down because that's where the automobile industry is located at. So a lot of neighborhood has really gone down. And in that area, what's going on right now is that people are buying homes in the city at one time it was $500 because they just really wanted to get people in those homes. But with that being said, you have situations where you have entire blocks not being used. So they have areas now where they have a lot of community gardens. But with that being said, on the street where my grandmother home is at, they had a community garden for over 10 years. What happened this year is that because still Detroit is trying to get people to come in and to buy, they sold a lot of if you lived to a lot that wasn't being used, or even if it was used, but it was there, you can buy it for $100. So that garden area, because it wasn't secure, because no one bought it, the gentleman that lived next to it, adjacent to it, bought it for $100. So that community garden now
it's not a public space.
It's not a public space. And that is sad because the community really was invested in that garden. They really love it. They had a big presentation over the years. Every year, everybody in the neighborhood plant things. The children love it. And it's not there anymore. Wow. And that's sad because I honestly think about Fresh. We don't own that land. Exactly.
Yeah.
And they support so many organizations, families in our community with the food that is being produced, but also that's being taught. Because they're teaching families how to invest in the land, how to grow their own food. And so it's a win-win.
And not secure. Well, we have a film clip. We have a couple of film clips from a movie called Homes in Hands, which is a public domain movie about community land trusts. And we're going to show about 9 or 10 minutes of what was done in Durham, North Carolina.
Community land trusts are nonprofit membership organizations that take a new approach to ownership of land and housing. The 3 land trust stories in this video show some of the ways that local residents in growing numbers of communities across the United States are organizing to gain control of their land and resources and using the land trust model to create a stock of permanently affordable housing.
I was a single mother with 3 children at that time. I just gotten divorced. And I was working 2 jobs and trying to go to school and take care of my kids. And the more money I make, the more they ask for. And I remember there were times when I had maybe $15 left over to carry me on to 2 weeks. And I was getting very frustrated with the system of, trying to have a decent place to live. For me, the future was quite bleak. I just couldn't help but think, what I'm going to do this all my life. I can't get ahead this way. I almost felt like, well, maybe I should just quit, go on public assistance, and let them take care of me. Buying a house was never a dream of mine. I never thought that I could ever afford it. But I was sitting in my office one day, and I was going through the newspaper, and I saw an ad in the paper saying that if you want to own a home, here's an opportunity, no money down. I'm like, right, yeah, right. But I felt like, let me take a chance. I'm going to call. I met the executive director, and I said, well, do you have any vacant houses right now? And she said, yes. And she brought me over to Exum Street, and the house was just in repair. But I loved it. I'm a country girl. I love the old houses. I love the front porch. I went inside and it had the high ceilings, and I was like, this is it. This is my house.
The organization Linda called was the Durham Community Land Trustees, based in the West End neighborhood in Durham, North Carolina, next to the upscale neighborhood surrounding Duke University. The Durham Land Trust, like many others around the country, was started to improve and preserve the deteriorating local housing stock that had been abandoned by absentee property owners.
If you drive through Durham, you'll see there's a lot of houses that are boarded up. And that's because absentee landlords can come in. They know that there are a lot of low to moderate income people that need housing. A lot of substandard houses. They used to be called liquor houses, if you want to put it. Actually, 4 walls, windows, no heat. And people used to come and stay for a little while. The landlords didn't do anything. They never complained. A lot of people don't know that they have a voice to say, I don't deserve to live this way. They can't afford anything better, so that landlords don't have any pressure behind them to fix it up.
During the era of about 1950, the elder people started dying out. And then that's when the landlords started moving into this area. Little by little, they took the houses over. And little by little, the younger generation sold the houses and moved out this area, moved north. And little by little, the landlord took the land for a little or nothing. What we want now is to make this a more family-type community like we have always had. The land trust got in here and they did a beautiful job. Somehow or other, they gave the people what they wanted, that was housing.
This is a typical Durham Community Land Trustee rehab. We've gutted it with volunteer efforts. We will take this house, and where there's tongue and groove hole, it'll be all new sheetrock, all new walls, new windows, new doors, fully insulated from the attic to the floors, actually blown into the walls. Everything will be new in terms of new fixtures, new kitchen, new doors. This will be back to regular height, and then the addition will be put back on the end. And after the resident selection process, we'll have a new resident move in for a home ownership opportunity.
I rang the doorbell so I can hear how it sounds. Listen, listen. Wow. The house is great. Look it. This is the living room. This is the kitchen. Look, this is what here's the bathroom. And this is my room.
Is that where you said you wanted to be?
Yeah.
Okay.
My old house was falling apart, and my grandma decided to move to a new house. And nobody even want to live there.
Come on up, pick up on it.
The Land Trust started work on this street and was invited in by the community with a community march that was organized to board up this house because there were drugs and other illegal activities occurring here that they wanted to restrict, which has been real typical on this street with any of the vacant houses. Since then, we have done 5 rehabs, and over time, it's really become a much more stable street. And this is typical on all the streets that we target. If we're able to get 3, 4, 5 houses rehabbed, tends to stabilize with the home ownership.
Land trusts reduce the cost of acquiring and renovating their properties and the initial purchase price to homeowners with government subsidies and private donations, including contributions of volunteer labor.
I asked them at that time was how much money do I need? About $1,500 to get in the house, to own it. And they were like, yes. They sat down with me and explained to me that I would be purchasing my home, but they would have to retain the ownership of the land. At that particular time, I wanted the house, and when I asked them why did they maintain ownership of the land, they explained to me that the reason they do that is to guarantee lifelong affordability. That should I ever decide to leave this home and move to the traditional market, that they would give this house back to someone who was in the same circumstances I would. I don't own the land, but I have full rights to the land. You know, and the one point I keep telling people, this is not a step, you're not fixed here forever. Should I move on in life, I will leave this house to my children. It will always be affordable to them.
You would have the same rights to that land as any other homeowner would. The only difference is that the land trust reserves the first right. If you decided to sell that house, the land trust would have the first right to purchase that house back from you, or we would help you find another low or moderate income person to purchase that house. And the idea behind that is to keep that housing stock permanently affordable. So that way investors or absentee landlords couldn't come in, buy that property and inflate the cost of rent so that low and moderate income people, would not be able to afford it. If you want to sell your house, there's a resale formula. This formula would give you back what you had invested in the house, plus an inflation factor. But you would not be able to go out and sell that house on the open market at an inflated value.
I know that I didn't buy this house to make a profit. I made it to get ahead. I always wanted to give that another person the same opportunity that I did. This is not the traditional market. You have to understand that principle before you buy a land trust house. All right, man, you want to set the table for me? You or your children must live in the property at least 6 months out of the year. I can't decide, well, I want to move to California for 6 months, so I want to sublease it to somebody. That's also part of the ground lease. You cannot do that. Land trust has built-in safety measures, too. It's meant to protect those who really need it, not those who are trying to get over on the system.
It's very different from just owning land and a piece of property that's all yours. This is ours, but it's also the community's. And so, we're not in this by ourselves, and we never will be. And if we keep the house and pass it on to our descendants, they won't be in it by themselves either. They will sort of inherit our connection with the neighborhood and with the other land trust houses.
I feel that we've had more success this year. We had our annual meeting, and we had great participation from the leaseholders, and there were some renters there. The Land Trust board is made up of a third residents, a third people in business, and then a third people in the community at large. The membership is made up of anyone who's willing to support our cause, and we have quite an extensive membership and people that support the work that we do.
Okay, welcome back. Okay, that did a pretty good job of explaining the Community Land Trust, but I know you had a couple of responses to that clip.
Yeah, I just feel like Linda's story as a single mother of three is the perfect model for a candidate that is going to benefit from a land trust. And the fact that she said she never dreamed of home ownership and that she thought it was unattainable. I mean, I thought that's what dreams were for, is to dream of the unattainable. So that made me really sad. And I appreciate that she discussed the conflict she felt between accepting assistance and independence. And again, the land trust is both of those things. And also her point about she didn't have a profit motive. And when she says that she's trying to get ahead, she's trying to get ahead in her own life, for her family, for future generations. It's not that she's going to be excluded from, the opportunity to gain some equity from this purchase, but it's not for the windfall.
And what we didn't see in this segment is that she goes on to talk about how she joins the board and she starts becoming very civically involved in many ways. So it turned out to be more, I think, than what she had thought she was getting into. So a lot of this, I mean, when I saw the film, a lot of it seems quite relevant to New London. So the local group that has been exploring the idea of a New London Community Land Trust has been doing some research, and I think we should talk a little bit about what we've learned about New London and how New London might benefit from this kind of experience. So maybe you can talk a little bit about home prices and income and what we have demographically in New London that would support this effort.
Sure. Throw in some numbers anytime I forget. But so what we know is that there are approximately 11,500 families and housing units in New London. And as Rana said earlier, 36.5% of those units are owner occupied. The remaining 63.5% are rentals, which is sort of the inverse of the national average and is generally considered a more stable model for a community. We started to map the city a little bit and try and find out where some of these housing units were. That so there's a 2,700 are set aside or eligible for low-income assistance, and so that's about a third as well, right? So and who is going to be eligible for low-income or affordable housing by those guidelines? So,
and a lot of those are age restricted, correct?
Some of them, yeah. There is some senior housing, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So 2,700 eligible low-income affordable houses by the HUD guidelines, which are based on the national guidelines developed by the Department of Health and Human Services.
Or I don't know if you want.
Yeah. This establishes what a median income is for our region. And that median income in New London County is $82,000. That's median. anyone who is it at 60% of that median income is eligible for low-income housing. So from there, they also establish what is a fair market rate for housing. And for 2018 in New London County, fair market rate for a 3-bedroom house is $1,575
A month.
a month.
Yeah.
I'm just wanted to make sure I
which
put
takes
that.
a huge chunk out of
Yeah.
people's income, more
Yeah.
than is supposed to go towards housing.
Yeah.
And this is not just for house. This is for if they were renting an apartment, $1,500.
Yeah.
So that's a big difference. I mean, because if it's okay, it's a lot.
Yeah, and affordable housing, of course, has been much in the news in New London with the impending dissolution of and demolition of the Thames River apartments, which, although we know they've been substandard for many years, are still housing about 120 families. And the question of where are these families, most of which are, have working heads of household, where are they going to go? And I just wanted to say very briefly that of the housing projects in New London that are being planned, that have been gone through the planning and zoning process, many of them are high end, on Howard Street, high luxury condos to appeal to EB and hospital employees, apartments on Mansfield that are market rate, that are also meant to appeal to, single people who are perhaps employed at EB or some better wage or places. Upstairs apartments being developed in downtown, most of which nowadays are pretty upscale. And the one project, at Edgerton School, which is, I think, currently at 74 units, which is supposed to be a mix of incomes. So some of the Thames River apartment people could move there, but certainly a relatively small percent.
And we're looking at that project could be completed in 2 years.
Something like that.
So imagine you got 120 families looking for housing right now, because they have to start now, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
How will they do we have any available housing, low-income housing right now, affordable housing?
I'm not sure, but I will give
London.
one small shout out to Mayor Passero, that he recently held a meeting with landlords from all around the city, an educational session to let them know about Section 8, so that there is some attempt to get people who own rental apartments all throughout the city to have the whole Section 8 process demystified, so that some of the empty apartments in New London could be available for families that are moving out of Thames River apartments. So there is some attempt going on to be a little more holistic, but I think what we found, this group now that's working on it found that one very underserved population were people who families that might have an annual income of $40,000 to $60,000, who are currently renting, who conceivably could be home buyers, but low-cost houses have a lot of other expenses, a lot of other hoops to go through. They might have medical debts or student debts, and these are people who really could become homeowners, help stabilize communities, but there really isn't a way for them to do that yet. So, I mean, I hate to say this, but we don't have a whole lot of time. But one thing that we noticed, I think we all noticed looking at that film, is that New London really doesn't have a lot of neighborhoods that we could turn into the Durham Land Trust model. So we have to be a little more creative. So we do have another film clip from that same film, Homes in Hands, about Burlington, Vermont, which is dealing with a little different situation, but kind of expanding what a land trust means. So I think we should look at that and then talk about what we can do here.
And most active in the country, the Burlington Community Land Trust has over 1,000 members today and was started with the enthusiastic support of a progressive city government that had just been elected, a government that was determined to find a long-term solution to the city's affordable housing crisis.
It's a university town. We had a waterfront that was developing, and the low-income neighborhoods adjacent to the downtown were in need, a great need of revitalization. It was an old housing stock, but we wanted to be able to revitalize those neighborhoods and improve them without gentrifying them. In other words, without making them unaffordable to the people who live there.
Certainly at the federal level, there has been an incredible investment in affordable housing over the past couple of decades. The problem has been that the benefit of that investment has typically been very short-lived. And after a fairly short period of time, the money that the public has invested in housing has gone out the door in the pockets of an investor, a developer, or a landlord, or a first-time home buyer. By supporting the community land trust model, a number of things are done. One is the profit motive is taken out of housing. And I think particularly if there's a public investment in housing, I think we ought to be very careful as to where that investment flows. And through the land trust model, that investment remains with the community, and the long-term affordability of that housing is guaranteed.
There's now over 300 families living in land trust housing, and that really encompasses a lot of different kinds of housing. We have folks living all the way from in shelter. We have single-room occupancy. We have the very affordable rentals. We have housing cooperatives. We have affordable condominiums scattered throughout the city and county, affordable single-family homes.
I'm real pleased that the Burlington Community Land Trust today is one of the largest, probably the second largest owner of residential property in the city.
The Land Trust's first focus is the revitalization of Burlington's Old North End, an old working-class neighborhood, and we've concentrated on buying multifamily buildings and rehabbing them, repairing them, making the rents affordable through a variety of grants and financing, and then managing them.
Over the years, the Land Trust has branched out from its initial role as a housing developer in the Old North End to include other kinds of community development, creating a neighborhood park, cleaning up and developing former dump sites and blighted properties, and providing homes to several nonprofit community facilities, including the Food Shelf, a meals program for the homeless, Vermont Legal Aid, and the Technology Center, which provides free and affordable computer training for local residents. These agencies either rent facilities from the Land Trust or own their own buildings on land leased from the Land Trust.
There's a sense in the community, I hear bankers saying this, hear people in the chamber saying this, that you can see a difference in the Old North End because of the Burlington Community Land Trust, and we're very proud of that.
Outside of the Old North End, the Land Trust has done other kinds of development as well, including single-family homes in the suburbs and rural areas on the outskirts of Burlington, and even condominiums right on the spectacular Lake Champlain waterfront.
And right next door to that building, recently were developed condominiums that are selling for up to $300,000, or sell all for under $100,000.
The Burlington Community Land Trust offers another option, over a dozen housing co-ops where residents jointly own their own buildings with other co-op members.
The Flint Avenue Co-op was the first big new construction co-op. It's mixed income from very low income with rental subsidy all the way up to market. It's a very successful co-op in terms of the folks managing themselves and managing their management company. It's like a flagship co-op.
Oh, it reduced the cost of housing. The Land Trust owns the land, and the cost to the people that are using the housing is reduced considerably.
Well, I have here a two-bedroom apartment, and I have a little backyard, which is really very nice because you can get, in a small place, you still can grow flowers and also some tomatoes and so on.
I have a two-bedroom very similar to what Crystal has. She has one more window than I do.
Because I want straight.
Essentially, we were not supposed to succeed because we were dealing with welfare mothers, we were dealing with single moms, we were dealing with quote-unquote moderate and low-income people. And those people are not supposed to know how to run things. And we're successful. The land trust came into this rather quietly and is still quietly involved in that they own the land and we sit on the land. And in a sense, there's kind of a very silent partner. And they watch out and look at us and don't let us get too foolish and that kind of stuff. And that's a help.
Another co-op the Land Trust developed is the Rose Street Artist Co-op, which is located in what used to be the National Biscuit Company. The first of its kind in Vermont, the former bakery now provides live-work space for 12 very low-income artists.
For the first time, I've been able to combine my living and my workspace in one, and I really love not commuting. Because what I do is so independent and so alone, it's nice to know that there is community around me, and it's something that I was lacking.
For some low-income residents, buying into a land trust co-op can be the first step into home ownership. It gives them an economic boost so that later they can buy a single-family home through the land trust as well. Today, the land trust is developing a new co-op right across from City Hall, restoring the old Hotel Vermont into a mixed development that will have very high-priced condominiums on the corner and 27 units of affordable cooperative housing in the center of the block.
We hope by having a cooperative right in downtown, in the downtown of Vermont's biggest city, that we can better show off the model to spread it around the state.
We've supported the Land Trust in a number of ways. Initially, we gave a seed grant of a couple $100,000 for the Land Trust. We've invested our employees' retirement funds in the Land Trust. We've targeted the Land Trust as the primary recipient of federal monies that flow through the city. We have worked in partnership with the Land Trust to secure monies from the state's Housing Conservation Trust Fund. We've also have taxed our residents. They have agreed to tax themselves. There's a penny on the tax rate in this city which supports affordable housing initiative, and much of that money flows through the Land Trust.
We're old enough to have had a number of resales, and we've seen it really work. I think this is the most elegant contribution that the Community Land Trust makes to affordable housing, and most unique. The second time around, we don't need any additional government subsidy, and we typically serve a lower income family. We're doing that at the same time that the seller is taking equity with them and has, of course, in that interim period, had all the tax benefits and all the security that homeownership offers.
Housing is not something that should be traded and sold as stocks or gold or pork bellies, but it should be treated differently. So it's a very conscious statement of public policy. We have attempted to decommodify the housing stock. So rather than government doing all the thinking, people who own their own homes, many of them for the first time, are true stakeholders and have some control over their destiny.
So I guess the question is, what's the relevance of all this to New London?
So this segment really seems to, in terms of the housing stock, the layout, the relationship to the water,
the art space, they even had nonprofits benefiting from this, or really our community benefiting from embracing them and allowing them to buy in. And then the mixed income housing by the waterfront. I love this particular part of this movie because it looks like New London. That's my opinion of it. It looked like New London. All the areas that they're talking about. I think New London could benefit from it because each part of our area in New London had something that they can relate to in this particular segment.
Well, I do think we have to realize that in New London we're not just going to take over a neighborhood and make it a community land trust neighborhood, that we really need to have a lot of different functions and different types of housing. And one point that didn't come up before, but I wanted to touch on it briefly before we talk about upcoming events, is how home ownership is actually cheaper than renting for many people.
Right, so with the statistic that we established, not a statistic, a fact, that the rate for a affordable housing is $1,575. We also, ran some numbers about the individual or family who might be making 40 to 60, and what it would be like for them to buy a $100,000 to $150,000 house in New London, and given mortgage payment, assuming they could get a low deposit amount, and even incorporating some money for utilities and their insurance, a person buying a home at that rate could be paying $1,100 to $1,300 a month. So, I mean, it's really easy to see how that additional money for folks that are struggling is going to be really helpful.
I think about when they're doing improvement on their home, they can write that off on their taxes.
Right.
So imagine.
And they can write their property taxes off on their taxes.
Oh, wow. See?
And the mortgage, and their, interest payments. So there are many benefits beyond just ownership. There are actually real financial benefits to owning. But yeah, New London, I think, can't refuse to look in any one, any particular single way to administer a land trust, because we have so many needs, so many spread out properties. I like the idea that the land trust had rentals as well as purchases, as well as, in Burlington they had community gardens, they had artists' lofts, they had co-ops, because the more diversity of housing you have, in any case, the better off you are. So what you can do, we have like 4 minutes left. There is an event coming up on Sunday, November 12th, and it's going to be at Mount Moriah on Moore Street. And a different film, which none of the three of us has actually viewed yet, called Arc of Justice, will be shown. And my understanding is that it's sort of about how this came about, the roots of land and housing, and how some segments of our society have been shut out of home ownership over the last 50 years. So it's a film and discussion. It's free. It's open to the public. I believe there's lunch included.
It is, yes.
Yeah, 1:30 to 3:30, Sunday, November 12th, Mount Moriah, which is on Moore Avenue. Jason Mancini from the Mashantucket Pequot Museum will be providing a perspective, and there will be a community conversation with Pastor Rich of Mount Moriah. So if you're interested, you can come to that. And save the date on December 10th, which is also a Sunday, and I believe also at 1:30 in the afternoon, the film Homes and Hands that these excerpts came from is going to be shown also at Mount Moriah. And it is a great film. It also talks about community land trusts in Albuquerque, and gives a little more detail than what you saw tonight about how the trusts work in Burlington and in Durham, and what happened 10 years after this film was made. So it brings things a little bit more up to date yet. So I don't know, is there anything we missed in the last couple minutes?
Well, we want to make sure that people come out. If they want to know more about community land trust, please take time to come to one of these discussions and view other films, because collectively together as a community we can make change. But it is about the community being involved, taking an interest. So bring your questions, bring your concerns, and let's talk.
I think that sounds great. Yeah. And I think New London would really benefit both the city as a whole and the people. I just want to give one small pitch for the movie. We Are Not Ghosts, if you ever get a chance to see it. It's about Detroit and some of the resurrection of Detroit that you were talking about. If you haven't seen it, it's really inspirational. It almost made me feel like moving to Detroit.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. Anyway, next week, Luther Weeks is going to be our guest, and he's going to talk about just the election aftermath, whether there were any problems with voting anywhere, and about the citizen audit observations that take place every year. So thank you. And I think we'll need another show on this as things come together. But thanks for coming on tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Africa.